It starts quietly, a moment, a glance, a feeling you can't quite name, and then, before you realize it, the foundation you once believed was sacred begins to tremble. You thought your marriage was covered by divine favor, protected by prayer, covenant love. But something shifted, something invisible, and the question starts to burn. Where is God in all of this? Why does he seem distant in your most intimate struggles? Especially when the bed, once a place of unity, becomes a battlefield of silence, pain, and confusion. In this video, we'll dive deep into what really happens during the act, the sacred and the subtle, and why, sometimes, God seems to step away from your marriage. If you've ever wondered why your connection is fading, or why your prayers for intimacy go unanswered, stay with us. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. And tell us, has God ever felt silent in your marriage? It's a truth few dare to speak aloud, especially within the walls of the church or the quiet corners of Christian homes. But if we are honest, truly honest, there are moments in marriage when the presence of God feels absent, especially in the bedroom. The very space that should represent unity, love, and divine connection sometimes becomes a place where we feel most alone. And this loneliness doesn't always come from lack of touch, but from the hollow ache that follows it. You may have heard it before. Marriage is a covenant, and sex is its seal. It's the visible, physical, emotional, and spiritual act that reaffirms the promises made before God and man. But what happens when this act becomes mechanical, empty, or even painful? When it shifts from sacred connection to something you endure rather than enjoy? Many believers silently ask themselves, if God created sex, why does it feel so broken now? There's a deeper layer to this question. It's not just about dysfunction or dissatisfaction. It's about divine absence. You prayed for your marriage, you fasted for it, you waited for it. So why, now that you're in it, does it sometimes feel like God has stepped away, especially in moments that should be the most intimate? Let's begin by talking about what the act truly represents. From a biblical and spiritual standpoint, intimacy between a husband and wife is not merely physical. It's spiritual warfare. It's covenant reaffirmation. It's a sacred echo of Eden. Every time a husband and wife come together in unity, it's meant to reflect the original design, naked and unashamed, vulnerable yet secure, giving and receiving without fear. But the truth is, we rarely experience it that way. Sin, trauma, expectations, comparison, and unspoken resentments seep into our sacred spaces. And slowly, what was meant to be holy becomes something confusing. We start to feel disconnected, not just from each other, but from God himself. And that disconnection, though deeply spiritual, is rarely addressed in church or Christian circles, because to do so would mean admitting that sometimes prayer isn't enough, that sometimes sex doesn't fix everything, that sometimes God feels absent in our holiest of places. Have you ever finished being intimate with your spouse and felt emptier than before? You might not even have the words for it. You just know something was missing. That's the moment you wonder, was God even here? Now let's be clear, God does not abandon us. He does not walk away from our pain, our struggle, or our sin. But there are moments when his tangible presence seems hidden, not because he is gone, but because something within us has shifted. Sometimes it's not that God steps away, but that we've unknowingly invited something else in. This brings us to the hard truth many don't want to face. Not all intimacy in marriage is God-honoring. And that's where the rupture begins. That's where the spiritual dissonance forms. You can be legally married, living under the same roof, sharing the same bed, and still be violating the very design God intended for your union. Let's talk about how that happens. It begins subtly, a lack of communication, a buildup of unspoken expectations, a quiet resentment over unmet needs. Soon, sex becomes a transaction instead of a transformation. You do it because it's expected, or because you think it'll fix the growing distance, or because you feel pressured, guilty, or emotionally disconnected and are trying to restore what's already fractured. In these moments, the act loses its sacredness, and God, though ever present, does not force himself into spaces where he's not honored. You see, holiness is not about perfection, it's about alignment. Alignment with God's heart, alignment with your spouse, alignment with truth. When intimacy becomes manipulative, when it becomes a performance, when it becomes a silent scream for validation rather than a mutual exchange of love, God, in his mercy, steps back, not to punish, but to expose, to reveal what's broken, because he's more interested in your healing than your pretending. There's a powerful verse in Malachi 2:15, "Has not the one God made you? You belong to him in body and spirit." And what does the one God seek? Godly offspring. So be on your guard and do not be unfaithful to the wife of your youth. This isn't just about physical infidelity. It's about emotional, spiritual, and covenantal unfaithfulness. It's about going through the motions of marriage while your heart is far away. God steps back so that we can see how far we've wandered, not from him, but from each other. Now you might be wondering, how do we get back? How do we invite God back into our marriage bed? It starts not in the bedroom, but in the heart. It starts with confession, with honesty, with vulnerability, with asking the hard questions. Why are we really distant? What wounds have we ignored? What needs have we silenced? What lies have we believed? So many Christian couples carry shame around intimacy because they were never taught how to approach it with both holiness and honesty. They were told to wait, but no one told them how to heal. They were told sex was sacred, but no one explained how to recover when that sacredness is shattered. And let's not pretend it's easy. These conversations are layered. They carry years of history, hurt, and misunderstanding, but ignoring them only widens the gap. If you're feeling like God has stepped away from your marriage, especially in the area of intimacy, this is not a sign of his absence. It's an invitation to stop pretending, to start healing, to come back to the beginning. I want you to think about this. When was the last time you invited God into your bedroom, not just through prayer, but through posture, through humility, through the way you looked at your spouse, through the way you touched them, spoke to them, responded to their needs? This isn't about performance, it's about presence. Because God doesn't dwell in perfection, he dwells in surrender. And when you begin to surrender the broken pieces of your marriage, especially the ones no one sees, he begins to rebuild what shame tried to destroy. We often associate God's presence with moments of worship, with prayer, with church. But the truth is, his presence is just as necessary in the bedroom, because that space, perhaps more than any other, reflects the rawness of who we really are. No masks, no titles, just two souls trying to love well in a broken world. And in that space, God wants to heal. If this is resonating with you, take a breath. This conversation might be stirring things in your heart you've tried to bury for years, memories, questions, frustrations. But don't run from them. Sit with them. Let God reveal what needs to be restored. And if you're still wondering, why would God step back from something he created? Maybe the better question is, what have I allowed in my marriage that might be pushing him away? Now's the time to take inventory. What do your conversations sound like before you're intimate? Are they rushed? Are they filled with pressure or guilt? Is there unresolved conflict? Do you feel safe, seen, cherished? Or do you feel used, unseen, or dismissed? These things matter. They matter deeply. Because God doesn't just care about what you do, he cares about how you feel doing it. He cares about your heart, your healing, and your wholeness. So before we move forward, I want to challenge you. Tonight, or whenever you feel ready, don't just crawl into bed and repeat the cycle. Pause. Hold your spouse's hand. Pray. Not a long religious prayer, but an honest one. Invite God into the moment. Ask Him to reveal, to restore, and to renew. And remember, restoration is not always instant. Sometimes God heals gradually, through uncomfortable conversations, through counseling, through learning each other all over again, through tearing down walls and building new foundations. But healing is always possible, always. So if you've been carrying the weight of confusion, shame, or silence around your intimacy, know this: you're not alone. You're not broken beyond repair. And God has not stepped away to abandon you, but to draw you back to what was always His desire, intimacy that reflects heaven. If this is stirring something in your heart, take a moment to comment below. Have you ever felt like God was silent in your marriage? Do you think it's possible to invite Him back into those intimate spaces again? I'd love to hear your story. And if you're finding this message meaningful, hit that like button so we know to keep bringing you this kind of deep, real conversation. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part of this powerful journey. And share this video with someone who might be silently struggling. They need to hear this too. We're just getting started. There's so much more to unpack. Stay with me. You see, when we talk about God stepping back from your marriage, we're not talking about abandonment. We're talking about silence with a purpose. It's a silence that searches the soul. A silence that asks, are you still seeking me in this place? Or have you replaced me with routine? Because routine, even in marriage, can become an idol. Think about that. We say we want a God-centered marriage, but how often do we operate on autopilot? We say the right things, do the right acts, and keep up appearances. But inside, the intimacy has turned cold. The truth? God cannot bless what we pretend to surrender, and no matter how often we engage in the act, if our hearts are not aligned, it will feel like heaven is quiet. Now I want to talk to the wives who feel invisible in their own homes. You love your husband. You serve your family. You've prayed, fasted, forgiven, even when it hurt. But when it comes to intimacy, you feel like an object instead of a partner. Your body is present, but your heart is retreating. And you're afraid to say it out loud because you were taught that submission means silence, that withholding is rebellion, that your role is to give, not to feel. Let me speak truth to that lie. Submission is not silence. God did not create you to be a shadow in your own covenant. He created you to be a voice, a partner, a reflection of His image. If intimacy leaves you feeling unseen, something is off, not just relationally, but spiritually. And to the husbands, I see you too. You've been told that sex is your need, your right, your release. That as long as you're providing and staying faithful, you're fulfilling your role. But inside, you feel unwanted, rejected, maybe even ashamed of how deeply your desire for connection gets misunderstood. You don't just want physical closeness. You want to feel loved, respected, wanted. And when that doesn't happen, you either shut down or seek fulfillment in dangerous places: your phone, your fantasies, your silence. Let me speak this clearly. Neither spouse is the villain, but both need healing. And true healing only begins when both are willing to stop pretending and start pursuing wholeness, not just in behavior, but in belief. Here's what we often miss. The act of sex is not just a union of bodies, it's an agreement of spirits, and whatever unresolved pain, pride, or bitterness you bring into that space becomes part of the experience. That's why you can be physically close and spiritually distant. That's why you can finish the act and still feel lonely, because sex doesn't fix what only truth can heal. Now let's go deeper. What are the spiritual blockages that keep God from fully dwelling in your intimacy? It's not just about sin in the obvious sense. It's about misalignment, bitterness, unforgiveness, control, shame. These are invisible walls that make a very visible difference. Let's take bitterness. It starts small, an unkind word, a forgotten anniversary, a moment of rejection. But if left unresolved, it grows roots. And when those roots spread, they choke out desire, communication, and trust. You might still go through the motions, but the garden is already dying. The soil is hard. The water is scarce. Or consider shame. For many couples, especially those raised in purity culture, the topic of sex was wrapped in fear. It was presented as something dangerous, sinful, until marriage flipped the switch. But flipping a switch doesn't heal a wound. So now, as a married believer, you might still carry the weight of guilt, discomfort, or confusion into your most intimate moments. And shame, if not confronted, becomes a silent wedge between you and your spouse, and between you and God. So how do we begin to heal? First, we have to talk. Yes, talk. Not during conflict, not during frustration, but in moments of calm. In moments when you both decide to listen without defending, to understand rather than react. Ask questions like, what do you need from me emotionally to feel safe physically? What fears are you carrying into our intimacy? How have I unknowingly hurt you in this area? What do we want to rebuild together? These aren't easy questions. They require courage, humility, and time, but they're necessary if you want your marriage to carry the presence of God again. Let's also talk about spiritual intimacy, because it's one of the most overlooked foundations of sexual connection. Praying together may feel awkward at first, especially if your relationship has been strained. But prayer is not just a spiritual act, it's an emotional exposure. It's saying, I choose to be vulnerable with you before God, even if I don't have the right words. That kind of vulnerability softens the heart. It reconnects what bitterness tried to sever, and over time, it changes everything. Some of the most healing moments in marriage come not from physical touch, but from spiritual alignment. When a husband and wife worship together, when they hold hands and cry without needing to fix anything, when they confess their fears and failures, not as a sign of weakness, but as a declaration of unity. That's where God shows up. That's where He breathes life back into the broken places. Now, I want to pause and tell you a story. There was a couple I once counseled. Let's call them Marcus and Talia. On the outside, they were the model Christian couple, active in church, raising godly children, hosting Bible studies. But behind closed doors, their marriage was dry. Talia felt unseen. Marcus felt unwanted. They had sex regularly, but it always ended in silence. No cuddling, no connection, just emptiness. When they finally sat down and spoke honestly, Marcus admitted he was struggling with resentment. Not just because of rejection, but because he felt emotionally disconnected for years and never said a word. Talia admitted she carried shame from childhood abuse and never felt safe during intimacy, but never thought she was allowed to say no. That night, they didn't fix everything, but they did something holy. They wept. They prayed. They held each other for the first time, not in passion, but in repentance. And in that moment, God stepped back in. That's what He wants to do for you too. So ask yourself, what am I hiding in my marriage bed? Not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. What needs to be said? What pain have I buried so deep that I no longer recognize it, yet it shapes every interaction? The good news is this: God doesn't require perfection to show up. He requires honesty. And when we're honest, truly honest about our pain, our shame, our disconnect, He doesn't run from us. He runs to us, but we have to make space. Not just in our hearts, but in our schedules, our habits, our conversations. You can't invite God into a space you keep filled with distraction. You can't expect healing if you never make time for rest, reflection, and restoration. So start small. Choose one night this week where you and your spouse put away your phones, turn off the TV, and just sit together. Not to be productive, not to plan, just to be present. Ask each other one question: What would it look like for us to reconnect, not just sexually, but spiritually? Let the answers come slowly. Let the silence stretch, and don't try to fix it. Just be there. Because intimacy isn't built in one night. It's cultivated over time, with patience, grace, and vulnerability. And if your marriage is in crisis, if the silence between you has grown too loud to ignore, don't be afraid to seek help. A Christian counselor, a trusted mentor, a pastor, someone who can hold space for your healing. Because sometimes restoration requires guidance, and there is no shame in that. You are not weak for seeking healing. You are wise. I want to end this segment with a question. What's one thing you've always wanted to say about intimacy, but were too afraid to speak aloud? Share it in the comments. You never know who else might need to hear that they're not alone. And if this message is speaking to your heart, don't forget to like the video so others can find it. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We're only halfway through this journey, and the next part will go even deeper. And please share this video with someone you know is silently struggling in their marriage. Healing begins with a conversation, and this one might change everything. Sometimes, what we experience in the bedroom isn't just a relational struggle, it's a spiritual battle. You may not see it, but you feel it. The heaviness, the disconnection, the distance that no amount of physical closeness seems to fix. Because there are moments when the attack on your marriage isn't coming from outside forces or your partner's flaws, but from the unseen war being waged over your unity. The enemy knows something many of us forget, that marital intimacy is not just a gift, it's a weapon, a God-designed force that strengthens covenant, fosters emotional security, and reflects the image of divine oneness. That's why it's constantly under attack. That's why the silence grows louder. That's why sometimes right after sex, you feel even more isolated. Because if the enemy can convince you that intimacy is broken, unnecessary, or shameful, he can fracture your union from the inside out. It's time to expose that strategy, to pull back the curtain and name the real source of the confusion, the guilt, the shame, and the passivity. Because too many believers are suffering silently in their marriages, thinking their issue is merely physical or emotional, when it's actually deeply spiritual. Let's go back to the beginning. Genesis. In the garden, before sin entered the world, Adam and Eve were naked and unashamed. This wasn't just about physical nakedness. It was about total exposure, complete vulnerability, no masks, no fear, no hiding. That's what intimacy was supposed to be. That's what sex was always meant to express. I see you completely and I'm not afraid. But once sin entered, everything changed. What was once beautiful became distorted. They hid, they covered, they blamed. And that's exactly what still happens today in many marriages. We hide our pain, we cover our shame, we blame each other. And we think that if we can just fix the act, everything else will align. But intimacy is not the solution. It's the reflection. It mirrors what's already happening in your relationship, in your communication, and in your connection to God. And if those things are broken, intimacy will feel like a burden instead of a blessing. Let's talk about expectations for a moment. Unspoken, unmet, and unrealistic expectations are some of the most corrosive forces in marriage. Maybe you expected your spouse to desire you more, to initiate more, to respond more emotionally. Or maybe you expected sex to fix the emotional disconnection, to erase the resentment, to validate your worth. But when those expectations go unspoken, they become internal narratives. And those narratives slowly erode trust, affection, and desire. You begin to assume your spouse doesn't care, that they're rejecting you, that you're not good enough. And without even realizing it, your heart begins to close. You go through the motions, but your spirit is guarded. Your mind is elsewhere. You perform, but you don't connect. This is why honesty is so vital. Not just honesty about what you want, but honesty about how you feel, about what wounds you carry into your most vulnerable moments, about what lies you've believed about your worth, your body, your identity. Because here's the truth, you can't build intimacy on a foundation of silence. It's in the moments of courageous confession that healing begins. When a wife finally whispers, "I don't feel safe when you touch me like that." When a husband admits, "I feel rejected every time you pull away." When both stop blaming and start owning, that's when God steps back in, not because the problem is solved, but because the truth has been invited. The Holy Spirit doesn't require perfection. He responds to truth, to honesty, to humility. And when a couple begins to engage with each other from a place of raw authenticity, the healing presence of God begins to flow in ways no counseling session, no book, no podcast ever could. Now let's talk about physical habits that can support or sabotage intimacy. One of the biggest issues in modern marriages is distraction. We are more connected digitally than ever before, yet more disconnected relationally. We bring our phones into bed, we scroll until we fall asleep. We use entertainment as a way to avoid conversation, and slowly, intimacy becomes an afterthought. If you want to rebuild spiritual and emotional connection, you must become intentional about creating space for it. That might mean turning off your devices an hour before bed. That might mean scheduling intentional moments of affection without expectation of sex. That might mean reading scripture together, not just as a religious duty, but as a way of aligning your spirits. Remember, you are not just lovers, you are co-laborers. You are not just spouses, you are spiritual partners, and what you build in the natural reflects what you believe in the spiritual. So what are you building? Let's go even deeper. There's another layer of this conversation that often goes unspoken in Christian circles, the impact of past trauma on current intimacy. For some, the struggle in marriage has nothing to do with their partner's actions, but everything to do with their past. Maybe you were abused. Maybe you were exposed to pornography at a young age. Maybe your first experiences with sex were filled with shame, coercion, or fear. And now, even though you're in a God-ordained marriage, your body still remembers the trauma, your mind still replays the lies, your heart still clenches at the thought of surrender. This is not your fault. And more importantly, this does not disqualify you from healing. You are not broken beyond repair, but you do need to face it, not to relive it, but to redeem it, to name the pain so it no longer controls you in silence. To invite your spouse into your story, not as a rescuer, but as a companion, because intimacy that ignores trauma is not true intimacy. It's performance. God wants to heal you, not just as a spouse, but as a son or daughter. He wants to restore what shame tried to steal. And he often begins that healing in the most unexpected places, like a quiet conversation on the couch, or a gentle prayer before bed, or a vulnerable journal entry where you finally say, "I don't want to be afraid anymore." If this is you, take heart. You are not alone, and there is help. Therapy is not weakness, it's wisdom. Healing is not instant, but it's always possible when God is in the center. Now let's shift toward hope, because the goal of this message is not just to confront the problem, but to illuminate the path forward. What does it look like to invite God back into your bedroom? It starts with 3 simple shifts. First, choose curiosity over assumption. Don't assume you know what your spouse is feeling. Ask. Don't assume you know why they're distant. Ask. Curiosity creates connection. Assumption creates distance. Second, choose compassion over criticism. It's easy to get frustrated when your needs aren't met. It's harder to ask, what pain are you carrying that makes it hard to connect? Compassion softens the heart. Criticism hardens it. Third, choose consistency over intensity. You don't need to have one perfect night of intimacy. You need to cultivate small, consistent moments of connection, a lingering hug, a kind word, a whispered prayer. These moments build trust, they create safety, and over time, they lead to deeper intimacy, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And don't forget, invite God in, not with fancy words, just with honesty. God, we need you in this space. We've tried to fix it ourselves, and we can't. Heal what's broken, restore what's lost. Teach us to love like you love. That prayer may feel small, but it opens a door the enemy cannot shut. Before we close this segment, let me leave you with a moment of reflection. Close your eyes and ask yourself, what is one thing I've been avoiding in my marriage? One truth I've been afraid to say? One memory I've never shared? One need I've buried? Now ask, what would it look like to bring that into the light? You don't have to do it all tonight, but start somewhere. Healing begins with one step. And if both of you are willing to walk that road together, even if it's slow, God will walk with you. He's not gone. He's waiting. And now I want to hear from you. What's been the biggest struggle in your journey toward intimacy with your spouse? Was it shame, silence, unspoken expectations, or something else entirely? Drop it in the comments. We read every single one. Your story could be the encouragement someone else needs to finally speak their truth. If this video is helping you, like it so we know this conversation is resonating. Subscribe for more content like this, and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment of this ongoing series. And share this with a friend or couple you know is navigating silence and pain in their marriage. One conversation can change everything. Stay with us. There's more to come. The slowest way for a marriage to die isn't through infidelity or betrayal or even neglect. It's through apathy, that quiet creeping indifference that says this is just how things are now. You stop fighting, you stop reaching, you stop believing that it could ever be better. You settle into the silence, and that silence grows thick, like fog, like dust on something that used to be beautiful. Apathy is the enemy of intimacy because it numbs you. It teaches you to exist without expectation, to sleep next to someone every night and forget that you once couldn't imagine a life without their touch, their words, their attention. Apathy whispers, don't hope, don't try, just survive. And that's not what God intended. But how does apathy start? It often begins after a long season of emotional fatigue. You tried, you reached out, you asked to talk, you were vulnerable, and you were met with distance, or defensiveness, or just nothing. Over time, you protect yourself by shutting down, by saying less, by needing less. But what you don't realize is that in numbing your pain, you also numb your capacity for joy. You stop laughing together. You stop praying together. You stop touching for any reason other than obligation. And you start to believe the lie. This is as good as it's going to get. But let me remind you of something sacred, something eternal. God did not create marriage to be endured. He created it to be a reflection of heaven, and heaven is not silent, it is not indifferent, it is not cold. So how do you fight apathy? With intentionality, with tenderness, with risk, because it is risky, isn't it? To care again, to speak again, to hope again. It opens you up to disappointment, to rejection, but it also opens the door to renewal, and it's worth the risk. Start with a question. When did we stop trying? Can we try again? Ask your spouse tonight. Look them in the eye and say, I miss us. I don't want to be roommates. I want to be partners again, lovers again, friends again. I want us to find our way back. Even if they don't respond perfectly, even if they just sit in silence, even if they laugh nervously or say they don't know how, that's okay. You planted a seed, and seeds, when watered with grace, can still bloom. Now let's talk about the power of physical affection outside of sex. It might seem simple, even superficial, but do not underestimate what a long hug can do, what a slow forehead kiss can say, what holding hands on the couch with no agenda can communicate. These small moments say, I see you, I'm still here, I'm still choosing you. Because here's the truth most couples forget. Before intimacy is ever physical, it is emotional, and before it is emotional, it is spiritual. And sometimes the reason sex feels broken is because the bridge to it has collapsed. You don't build that bridge with grand gestures. You build it with consistency, with patience, with eye contact, with listening. It's asking your spouse how their day really was, and actually listening without trying to fix it. It's noticing the tension in their shoulders and offering a massage, not as a lead-in to something more, but as a simple act of care. It's waking up and saying, "What can I do today that would make you feel loved?" Now let me be clear, this is not about earning intimacy, it's about creating safety, because true intimacy only thrives in the soil of safety. Emotional safety, relational safety, spiritual safety, and safety doesn't happen by accident. It's built, it's chosen, it's protected, which brings us to another enemy of intimacy: unresolved conflict. There are couples who haven't fought in years, and that's not because they've achieved peace. It's because they've stopped engaging. They've chosen silence over confrontation, distance over honesty, and that silence becomes a wedge, a wall, and eventually a prison. If there are wounds in your marriage that have never been addressed, they don't just disappear, they fester. And every time you try to be close, those wounds bleed. You might not see it, but you feel it. The coldness, the tension, the lack of trust. You cannot build intimacy on a foundation of bitterness. You cannot create closeness while hiding unhealed wounds. It's time to talk, not with accusations, not with ultimatums, but with courage, with grace, with the simple desire to understand. Start with this: "When you said this, I felt that," or "I've been holding this in, but I need you to know," and then listen, really listen. Not to argue, not to correct, but to connect. That's the first step. And it may not fix everything overnight, but it begins the process. It cracks the wall, it lets light in. And don't forget, forgiveness is a decision before it becomes a feeling. You may not feel like forgiving, you may not feel like letting go, but every day you choose bitterness is a day you delay healing. Now I know what some of you are thinking. What if I'm the only one trying? What if my spouse has already shut down completely? To you, I say this: your effort is not wasted. Your prayers are not unheard. Your vulnerability is not in vain. God sees you, every tear, every attempt, every whispered plea for change. And while you cannot force another person to change, you can change the atmosphere of your home. You can be the one who softens the edge, who prays when it's awkward, who speaks life instead of resentment, who blesses instead of blames. This doesn't make you weak, it makes you powerful, because love, real love, is not reactive, it is proactive. It chooses to create what it hopes to see. And one final truth: sometimes the most powerful healing comes not from what you do, but from what you stop doing. Stop keeping score. Stop comparing your marriage to others. Stop waiting for perfect conditions. Stop rehearsing the offenses and start noticing the progress. Start celebrating the small wins. The 5-minute conversation, the unprompted hug, the shared laugh, these are seeds. And they matter. You are not failing because it's hard. You are healing because you're willing. So take a breath. You are not behind. You are not broken beyond repair. You are in process. And so is your spouse. Give each other grace. Give each other time. And above all, give God access. Tonight, don't just crawl into bed and repeat the same routine. Pause. Turn to your spouse. Hold their hand. Say something true. Something kind, something healing. And then, when the lights are off and the world is quiet, whisper a prayer, together or alone. God, heal what we can't fix. Speak where we've grown silent. Restore what we thought was lost. And help us find each other again. If you can do that, even once, then you're already walking toward wholeness. Now I want to hear from you. What's been the hardest part of reconnecting with your spouse? Is it communication, timing, fear, pride? Let us know in the comments. Your honesty could be the key that unlocks someone else's healing. If this message is helping you, if it's speaking into the silent spaces of your heart, don't forget to like the video. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss what's coming next. And hit the bell icon so you're the first to know when a new video is posted. And please share this with someone you care about. There are couples right now on the verge of giving up. And this might be the word that pulls them back from the edge. You're not alone, you're not abandoned, and your story is not over. Maybe, just maybe, you've made it to this point not because everything's broken, but because something inside you refuses to settle. Because despite the numbness, the silence, the confusion, you still believe in restoration, in redemption, in intimacy that mirrors heaven. And that belief, however small, is enough, because God doesn't need your perfection to move. He needs your permission. He's not looking for flawless marriages. He's looking for surrendered hearts, for couples willing to say, "We can't do this without you." So if you've been wondering, why does God step away? Maybe now you're ready to ask a better question. What if He's never left, but we've stopped inviting Him in? God doesn't retreat out of punishment. He steps back so we can see what's missing, not to shame us, but to awaken us. Because a marriage that looks whole on the outside but is starving on the inside is not what He designed. He wants you fed. He wants you full. He wants you flourishing. He wants the moments behind closed doors to be filled not with fear or tension, but with trust and laughter, with real connection, with His peace. But to get there, we must be willing to unlearn the false versions of intimacy we've inherited. We must unlearn the belief that sex is a duty, that passion fades with time, that silence is safer than honesty, that performance matters more than presence. God is inviting you into a new rhythm, one that begins not with physical touch, but with spiritual alignment. Not with technique, but with tenderness. Not with effort, but with surrender. And that invitation is open right now. So what do you do from here? You start with prayer. Honest, raw, sometimes messy prayer. The kind that says, "Lord, I don't even know where to begin, but I want to invite you back into this part of my life." Then you speak to your spouse. Not to accuse, not to provoke, but to say, "Can we try again? Can we learn each other again, not as we were, but as we are today?" And then you listen for their pain, their hope, their confusion. You listen not to respond, but to understand. You give each other grace. You give each other room to grow. You become each other's safest place again. Because when God is invited into your intimacy, everything changes. The silence becomes sacred. The act becomes worship. The bed becomes holy ground. And little by little, the things you thought were lost begin to bloom again. Desire, laughter, safety, unity, and most of all, hope. Hope that you don't have to repeat the past, that your story can be rewritten, that your marriage can be a miracle, not because it's perfect, but because it's surrendered. So if you've made it this far, I want you to know something. God is not finished with your story, not with your heart, not with your spouse, not with your marriage. He is still writing, still speaking, still healing, and today can be a turning point. Not because you heard the right words, but because you're ready to take the next step. So take it. And let this be the moment you stop hiding, stop pretending, stop performing, and start healing. Start reconnecting. Start rediscovering the sacredness of intimacy. Let this be the moment you decide, we're not giving up. Not now, not ever. If this message has spoken to you, if it's stirred something in your soul, please take a moment right now and like this video. It lets us know that you want more of these raw, honest, spirit-led conversations. Leave a comment below. What part of this message hit home for you? What are you hoping God will do in your marriage? Don't be afraid to speak it. Healing begins with truth. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the upcoming videos that will continue to walk with you through these deeply personal, powerful topics. And most importantly, share this with someone who needs to hear it. A friend, a couple, a pastor, a sibling, someone who's silently struggling and needs to know they're not alone. Because God is not absent. He's waiting, He's ready, and He's calling you back to love, to truth, to intimacy, and to Him. Let Him in. Your marriage is worth the fight. Your story is worth the healing, and your heart, it was always meant to feel whole again. You are not too far gone. You are just beginning. So don't look away. Don't give up. Look up, because the miracle starts now.